It began with a color the sky should not have known. There were clouds. Yes, though not clouds in the way a world of ash and steel understands them. They were not moisture, not vapor, not even gas. They were matterless pressure, a ceiling of density that pressed down as if the sky itself resented the ground. And within that churn of suffocating grey, something shimmered. Not light, not fire. Something wrong. On the forge world of Thamnaris Delta, sunrise had no meaning. There was only shift and not shift. Time ticked, not in hours, but in power surges, in alarm chimes and labor cycles, in the blackening of coolant fluid or the red-hot pulse of a plasma conduit failing beneath the grates. No trees, no horizon, just manufactura that spanned continents, reactors the size of cathedrals, and the constant hiss of mechanized prayer through vox-chanting shrines. The machine god was everything, and in the eyes of its tech priests, the universe had always been made of ordered steel and predictable entropy, until the sky changed. Iskatar Weiss noticed it during a routine recalibration of orbital gravimetric arrays. She was not a senior adept, merely a Tier 3 data chronicler working the third cycle in Red 17. Her duties were to maintain signal integrity and ensure that deep void satellite telemetry remained stable for inbound convoy route. 1,000 calculations per cycle, corrected by instinct more than reason. The sort of task that demanded focus, not imagination, but the sky outside the upper view port rarely looked upon by anyone who valued their retinas was flickering, and she couldn't pretend she hadn't seen it. A subtle, pulsing distortion. Not in the cloud layer, beyond it. Something falling, though not through gravity. A descent without direction. At first, she said nothing. Data glitches were common. Static interference, ambient radiation, micropulses from the forge reactors themselves. But it persisted. Unmapped orbital debris, the algorithms said. Density irregularities in a Lagrange point field. But Weiss had seen orbital decay before. She had charted meteor clusters, plasma flares, failed orbital drops. This was different. The first impact struck near Sector 91 Gamma. The Auspex registers flared, then went dead. No seismic signature, no heat bloom. Just a visual high-angle cam feed that captured something piercing the Manufacturum dome, vanishing into the floor below, followed by the flickering of cogitator relays as every system attached to the grid went dark. Then the second one struck. Then the third. They were falling across the entire hemisphere, long thin objects, too fast for trajectory locks, too clean for asteroids. No flames, no entry trails. Just dark lines, like needles piercing flesh, sliding silently through clouds and plating alike. And they did not stop. Iskatar Weiss stood, alone in the observation terminal as the rain fell. Not water, not stone, not fire, iron, not forged by human hand, not shaped for war, or at least not war as anyone on Thamnaris understood it. She didn't know why she whispered then, or who she whispered to, but she found her voice before the first emergency klaxon sounded. They're not supposed to fall like that. The machine god gave no answer. The descent didn't stop, not after hours, not after days. What began as an anomaly became a litany, an unending barrage that made the sky weep iron without flame or fury, as if the laws of re-entry had simply been They struck with clinical precision, puncturing domes, silos, barracks, fusion farms never at random, yet never predictable. No energy signature, no auger trace, no motive. Just impact, silence, corrosion. By the second day, the Forge World had entered lockdown. All skittery units were deployed in concentric search patterns, their galvanic rifles loaded but unused, their protocols failing to define the intruders, for none were found. No wreckage, no shrapnel, no remains of the objects that had fallen. Only the holes they left, perfectly vertical bores through plasteel and ferrocrete. Some ended in the ground. Others disappeared entirely into places where ground should have been shafts that reached deeper than the tectonic stabilizers. Places where no excavation records existed. And below, in the subterranean levels beneath Manufacturum Iskatar Weiss watched the old picked feeds stutter and die. She had been transferred without explanation. 2 senior adepts had gone silent. Her new station had no name, only a designation, Voltnal 4A. She was escorted by a silent pair of secretary whose robes bore no sigils, whose helms bore no optics. They watched her the way machines might study entrepreneur malice, just inevitability. Inside the vault, the air was colder than vacuum. Not in temperature, but in intent. Rows of cogitators, black and ancient, thrummed with internal warmth but gave no light. They were not connected to the central noosphere, not even to each other. Each terminal was self-contained, sealed with wax and rune and sacred filament. She was told to monitor Terminal 13, nothing more. That night she heard it, not a voice, not a sound. A sensation, it began in her teeth. A low resonance, like pressure building beneath the enamel. Then the flicker behind her ISA, shape her optic nerve could not process, like static with direction. She turned toward the terminal, and for a moment, it wasn't there. Then it was again, flickering, real but not present, and the iron rain continued to fall. Outside, a mag train screamed off its tracks without collision. The crew were found locked in place, eyes open, hands fused to their controls by some unknown means of molecular distortion. A skittery cohort sent to investigate did not report back. When a second cohort arrived hours later, they found no bodies, only boots, arranged in a circle, clean, as if their wearers had evaporated where they stood. Iskatar stopped trying to write reports. There was no outlet, no data tether to send them, and even if there had been, she began to doubt they would have reached anyone beyond these walls. Her world was narrowing. The silence in the Vox channels deepened. Even the machine spirits seemed subdued, their usual hum replaced by reluctant clicks, as if unsure whether they were permitted to speak. One night, if the cycle could still be called, Nightshare awoke to find the door to the vault ajar. No footsteps, no noise, just the yawning dark beyond. She stared into it, her breath visible despite the thermal regulators that should have kept the air warm. And in that stillness, a single, impossibly fine filament drifted through the crack, metallic, almost organic. Like a strand of hair made from liquid steel, it curled toward her slowly, not moved by current or air. Drawn or drawing. She stepped back, the filament following like a question without words. Then the vault doors slammed shut. She didn't sleep after that. In the end, it was not the noise that broke them. It was the absence of it. Thamnor is -delta had always been loud. The unceasing rhythm of gears, the pulsing churn of power conduits, the server litanies of laboring Atari, the overlapping dronings of hymnal chants echoing through steel corridors blended into a kind of living mechanical choir. But after the 6th day of the reign, all of it stopped. Entire sectors fell silent, not in the chaotic aftermath of disaster, but in the precise stillness of cessation. Cogitators shut down without fault codes. No explosions, no alarms, just off. Fabricator engines ceased movement. Reactors continued to burn but emitted no heat. Auspex relays lit but transmitted nothing. And over the Vox, only static punctuated by rhythmic pulses, too regular to be organic and too organic to be regular. In Voltnor, for a Iskatar, Vice had stopped logging her thoughts. Her journal entries, once dry data observations, had become desperate half-whispers, scrawled on cracked parchment. She knew the machine spirit would disapprove of using organic record-keeping, but the machine spirit had stopped answering. There was one entry she'd repeated again and again, filling up 3 entire pages without realizing it. They are not falling. They are being sent. Whatever the iron rain was, it had intent. The impacts had grown less frequent, but more deliberate. Each object now struck deeper infrastructure targeting, not population, not power systems, but memory cores, archives, vaults. The past itself was being impaled, deleted one impact at a time, as though the world's history was being erased, not by fire, but by surgical precision. And one by one, the senior adepts began to change. Not visibly, not entirely, but Vice began to notice patterns, moments when their speech lost context, times when they repeated the same phrase verbatim, down to breath and blink, hours or days apart. She saw high adept Morlocks stand in the exact same spot outside the Cogitator Temple at the exact same time across 3 consecutive shifts, murmuring the same non-binary prayer sequence. Though his neural port had been disconnected after the first, she confronted Adept Morlocks once. She asked him what he was doing. His reply was simple: "I am buffering." Then he smiled, but only with his eyes. Vice stopped sleeping altogether. Her skin began to peel in fine layers, the recycled air full of unseen particles. Food paste tasted like old copper. Her eyes watered not from grief, but from the flickering of lights that weren't flickering, and always the filament returned, sometimes through cracks in the wall, sometimes from beneath her, once horrifyingly coiled inside her meal pack, a single strand of dark silver humming softly as though breathing. She burned it. It returned the next day, arranged into a spiral beneath her cot by the time the first collapse occurred. She'd almost forgotten that the rest of the world might still be alive. It came without tremor. No quake, no sound. Just a sudden alert in the deep vault sector. 1-4D had disappeared. Not been destroyed. Not gone offline. Disappeared. Replaced by void space in the data registers, as if it had never existed. No structural reports, no casualty estimates, just blank. And when Vice checked her map to reorient herself, she realized something colder than fear. There was number 1 for D on the schematic. There never had been, and yet, she remembered it. She remembered walking its heat-baked transit tunnels to get to the cooling stacks. She remembered the graffiti left by initiates bored during purification cycles. She remembered the broken statue of the Omnissiah, its cog-toothed halo cracked by a structural beam. But in the archives, nothing. She looked again. Nothing. And then, without transition, her cogitator screen began displaying a symbol. Slowly, pixel by pixel, no signal, No input, just emergence. It was a circle. No, not quite. A spiral, made from filaments, and at the center of Atani. But not one that saw, one that recorded, and beneath it, words, not in Low Gothic, not even in Benaric. But she understood them. The past is heavy. The fall is mercy. She touched the screen. The vault lights flickered once, and the rain stopped, but only outside. Inside, the falling had just begun. When you listen too long to something not meant to be heard, it begins to listen back. The silence after the rain was not stillness. It was hunger, an absence that wanted filling. The Vox channels no longer buzzed with static. They didn't buzz at all. Even white noise required entropy, and entropy had paused. But in that pause, something began to pulse, faint, precise, rhythmic. Not a transmission, not interference. A message, Iskatar, Vice. First noticed it when her own heartbeat slowed to match the clicking. It came from Terminal 13, the same unit that had first flickered with alien symbols. But this time, the display showed only a single strand of binaric code, cycling endlessly, perfectly looped. No deviation, no conclusion, just RECURSION. She leaned closer, eyes narrowed. The line scrolled upward in slow repetition. Familiar shapes, at first command patterns she'd memorized as an initiate, but then, embedded between them, impossible syntax. Forms that had no linguistic precedent. Glyphs with curvature where angles should be. Logic that defied calculation. She isolated the signal, cordoned the sequence. She tried to delete it. It returned. She disabled power to the cogitator. It remained active. Then, against protocol, she disconnected the device from all energy inputs. And still the strand pulsed softly against the glass it wasn't running on. Electricity, it was running on memory. And the longer she stared at it, the more she began to hear it, not in her ears, but behind them, buried somewhere inside the skull's backfold, where memory and pattern intertwine. The code wasn't just data. It was shape, sound, direction. It was structuring her thoughts without permission. And in those moments, for the first time, she knew she was no longer alone in her mind. The vault around her began to change. Doors she had passed 100 times now bore strange marks etched into metal, not with blade, but by erosion, as if something had brushed against the surface again and again, like the tide wearing down stone. And in the reflection of the polished steel, her own image stuttered, not flickered, stuttered, like an old pictorial with missing frames. On the 6th cycle after the reign's end, an astropath arrived. No escort, no clearance logs. He was simply there, standing in the lower vault corridor, blindfolded, skin blistered from psychic strain. His mouth moved, but no sound came. Yet she heard him. He said her name, not aloud, not in thought. He said it, backwards, and then he screamed. No sound passed his lips, but the walls reverberated. Metal groaned. A servitor collapsed mid-cycle, its arms locked in a contorted shape resembling a warning glyph. The astropath's body twisted, slowly, impossibly, until his bones cracked without blood, and he crumpled to the ground in a fetal spiral. There was no autopsy, no record. The body was gone by the next cycle. Only the vault remembered. And in Terminal 13, a new strand had appeared. Coordinates, not stellar, not spatial, but temporal. A time that had never existed in any Imperial record, and beside it, a word, return. Weiss had never believed in prophecy, not in the way the ecclesiarchy preached it, with saints of fire and visions bathed in starlight. She was born to logic, raised in the red-robed order of the cog and circuit. To her, the future was a probability engine, chaotic, perhaps, but never unknowable. But as she stared at the temporal coordinates looping on her cogitator, she felt the lie in her bones. It wasn't the date that unsettled her. It was the fact that it didn't exist. The Imperial standard maintained a strict calendar across all administrator-recognized worlds, even during warp storms or crusade disruptions. Time was tracked with relentless precision, recalibrated through astropathic pings to Terra itself. But the moment displayed on Terminal 13 was wrong, not by error, but by design. It pointed to a moment that had been excised from galactic memory. The time stomp was buried between standard years, between cycles. A blind spot, a fracture, a skipped beat in the pulse of history. She attempted to cross-reference it using backup arcs local, disconnected, untouched by recent vault collapses. What she found was worse than absence. She found contradiction in one file, dated just prior to the anomaly. A skittery legio had reported the installation of a new defense grid near the planetary pole. But in another, allegedly from the same cycle, the same legio was listed as destroyed in action on a world 100 light-years away. Both files bore matching verification codes. Both had been signed by the same mug. Both could not be true. The signal was rewriting memory. Not just her own. Not just the vaults. The entire history of Thamnoris Delta was being overwritten, not with violence, but with uncertainty. She began to notice the bleed effect more acutely after that. Corridors. She walked daily now, curved where they once ran straight. A lift that always stopped at level 6 now opened to an atrium she had never seen. A chamber lined with statues she could not identify. Each wore the robes of the Mechanicum, but their faces were veiled, and beneath their feet, etched into the obsidian floor, the same spiral sigil appeared again, not carved, embedded. Worse still, she wasn't sure if anyone else noticed. The remaining adepts moved with fractured precisions. Some repeated the same actions for hours. Some stared at blank screens and nodded as if receiving instruction. The deeper she went, the more she understood. They were no longer reacting to the world. They were syncing with it. On the 8th day, something entered the vault. Not through doors, not through air ducts, but through sound. It began as a vibration in the steel. A slow hum, imperceptible at first, then rising to a trembling resonance that passed through bone and machine alike. The walls pulsed once, faintly, then again. With each pulse, light dimmed not from power loss, but as if illumination itself were being compressed. Weiss tried to scream. She opened her mouth, but no air moved. Her lungs were full, not of breath, of static. And then she heard the voice not with her ears, but with her spine, not speech, not intent. Just presence. It pressed against her mind, like a hand pressing against glass, not to crush, but to knock. Behind her, Terminal 13 began to shift. Not in form, in function. Its screen no longer displayed data. It displayed her, not a reflection, a recording. Herself, seconds behind, eyes wide, mouth frozen mid-scream. Then milliseconds behind, then perfect synchronicity, then a moment ahead. She staggered back, dizzy, and the screen went black dot when it lit again. The symbol had changed. It was no longer a spiral, it was an eye open, watching, and beneath it, in the same impossible script, "Open the vault, and I will stop remembering you." She did not open the vault, not because of fear, not even from self-preservation, but because something deeper than instinct warned her. It wasn't a command. It was a test. The thing behind the signal, whatever it was, had already entered the system. It had already seen her, known her. It had no need for doors, and yet it asked. That was the horror. It asked. It made her complicit in her own unraveling. For hours, she sat before the terminal, unmoving. The message did not change. The eye remained, watching her, not blinking, waiting. But there was no direct override, no data hook or neural interface. Just the screen and the wordless pressure pressing down like gravity on her thoughts. She began to hallucinate, or perhaps merely perceive. At the edge of her vision, code leaked like ink down the walls. Glyphs rearranged themselves behind her eyes. Sounds emerged from dead Vox Grill's recordings of voices she'd never heard, speaking with her own intonation, as though her future self had been fractured into echoes. The remaining adepts were no longer human. They still wore the flesh. They still recited protocol and lit incense before decrepit cogitators. But their eyes did not track motion. They saw through it, past it, through her. When she tried to speak to Adept Corlin, his reply was soft, almost mournful. "You are still remembering forward. That is dangerous." She asked what he meant. He turned away and whispered, "The rain was a gift. It softened the surface." Later that cycle, Corlin removed his own augmentic eyes with a pair of data spikes, slowly, without bleeding. She should have run then. But where? There was nowhere left untouched. The outer sectors no longer responded to signal. The emergency beacon tower, normally an independent fallback system, now looped a single word in overlapping pitch. A harmonic shriek that drove servitors mad. "Descend." That was all it said. That was all anything said now. And in the deepest vaultnal, 0. A chamber thought sealed since the pre-Imperial Mechanicum, the lights began to flicker in a pattern. Not random. Not Morse. Something older. She decoded it on instinct, the way one hears the rhythm of language in heartbeat and breath. It was a name, not hers. Not of anyone she knew, but it knew hers, and she understood then what the signal truly was. It wasn't a call, it was a memory, not hers, its dot, and by existing within its field, by witnessing it, she had become part of that memory, threaded into it like code into machine, irrevocable dot at last. She returned to Terminal 13. Her reflection greeted her not as it was, but as it had been, unchanged, untouched by days of descent and sleeplessness. A lie of continuity. She reached toward it. The message blinked once. "I have remembered you completely. Now you must forget yourself." She felt the shift in her chest before she felt anything else, a displacement, not physical, but chronological. Her memories of the last day unraveled in reverse, falling like ash into her lungs. The terminal showed her own past actions seconds before she remembered them. A time bleed, a collapse in sequence, and then the screen cleared. A single frame appeared, coordinates, but not of the vault, not of the planet, of the mind, and beneath it. Vault access granted. She hadn't typed it, she hadn't spoken it, but the vault unlocked all the same. And behind her, From the long shadow of the corridor, the sound of falling began again, not outside, inside, piece by piece. The world was folding in, and it remembered her name now. At first, the sky cleared, not in hope, not in mercy, but in surrender. The storm that had once vomited iron from the heavens was gone, leaving behind no clouds, no movement, no wind, just the kind of stillness that belonged to dead systems and forgotten moons. The kind of stillness found only in tombs. Orbiting above Thamnaris Delta, the long-haul trade vessel Mercantile Trust in his light drifted far off its charted route. Magneto, sails slack, Voxerays cold. Its navigators were dead, not slain, not corrupted, just gone. Their thrones remained occupied, bodies fossilized in a state of perfect neural lock. Minds snapped mid-thought, as if reaching for something too vast to grasp and too real to unsee. Their third eyes, long sewn shut by ritual wire, had opened. No blood, no light, just dry sockets and the smell of burnt incense. In the command sanctum, automated subroutines continued the ship's rotation, spinning in slow, prayerful orbit over the world below. The astropathic matrix wept data lochromata into corrupted slates, trying to process a signal that wasn't being transmitted. There was no source, no destination, just a frequency, constant and sickening, back on the surface. Iskatar Weiss emerged from Voltnal for a changed. She didn't remember stepping out. She didn't remember walking. Her last conscious moment had been the unlocking of the forbidden gate and then blackness, not of sleep, but of redacted sequence. Something had overwritten her presence. Her arms were marked, not with wounds, but with inscriptions, fractal etchings in machine script so fine they could only be seen under infrared light. They pulsed with faint heat, like active circuitry. The inscriptions matched no known dialect, and when she tried to speak aloud, her voice broke into dual tones, one hers, and one a half-second delayed, whispering the same words in reverse. She wasn't alone in herself anymore by then. Entire sections of the Forge world had ceased to exist in any measurable way. Satellite scans returned, fragmented Imager-cities half present. Manufactura whose foundations stretched downward into nothingness. Reality, it seemed, had been edited and beneath the surface, deep below even the tectonic strata. The world began to hum, not mechanically, organically, as if something enormous had awoken, something that had not moved in tens of thousands of years. The tech priests who remained functional, those not converted or catatonic, began to speak of resonant They claimed the planet's core was no longer molten metal but phased frequency, that the Forge world was not dying but transforming, but into what? No one had an answer. Only fragments, glimpses, like the custodian patrol vessel Argent Vigil, which passed near Thamnaris Delta on its way to the Segmentum Solar, reporting a mass anomaly within the planet's gravitational field. They scanned, they observed, and then, for precisely 19.3 seconds, their Geller field failed. Nothing should have survived, but they did, at least. Their bodies did, recovered later by an inquisitorial retrieval team. The custodies were found kneeling, motionless, golden armor intact, eyes open, no visible wounds. Their genocide unreadable. Their voices, should they have been capable of sound, were locked in a perpetual exhale, the last entry in the Argent Vigil's captain's log, preserved only in physical script, read, "We saw it. A sun beneath the crust." But it was wrong. not light, not fire. A memory pretending to be warmth. It was the heat that betrayed the illusion first, not the temperature, no. The surface of Thamnaris Delta remained cold, mechanical, shielded by layers of atmospheric pollutant and ancient machine breath. But deep below, in the forbidden strata once sealed beneath adamantine bulkheads and logic lock vaults, something began to radiate, not warmth, but pressure. A metaphysical heat, a memory of fire. Iskatar Weiss felt it before any instrument did. Her veins prickled, not with fever, but with proximity. As she moved deeper into the core, tunnels compelled by impulses she could no longer distinguish from her own, her skin reacted to the walls as if they were alive, conductive, listening. The light followed her not in cones from lumin, but in pulses from the metal itself, glowing dimly in recognition. She was the first human to descend this far in perhaps 10,000 years, or perhaps the last in only 10 hours. Time had begun to lose fidelity. At level omeganol, she found the stair. It wasn't made of steel, not plasteel, not ceramite. It resembled bone, but hummed like crystal. Each step vibrated as she touched it, releasing small motes of floating light that vanished the moment she blinked. It did not spiral down, but rather folded inward, curving in ways that contradicted geometry. Yet her feet obeyed. Her body followed, and at the base, the door waited. No, not a door. A veil, a barrier that shimmered not with energy, but with absence. Her reflection did not appear on its surface, nor did her shadow cast behind her. It was a membrane of unbeing, pulsing gently. As if breathing in the light, she reached toward it, and as her fingers passed through, she saw the sun, but it was not a star, not plasma, not fusion. It hovered at the center of a great hollow sphere, miles across, carved from ancient stone and forgotten tech, orbited by machines long dead yet still turning. Out of memory rather than power, it pulsed, slowly, in a rhythm not unlike a heart, and with each pulse, images flashed across the chamber walls. Not holograms, not projective illusions, but impressions, living moments scraped from reality and played like echoes. She saw skittery battalions walking in reverse, folding back into their dropships. She saw adepts praying to engines that had yet to be built. She saw herself, a dozen copies, all standing in different places, all watching her, and at the heart of the false sun, a shape began to emerge. Not clearly, not fully, but she felt its recognition, not sentient, but aware, malevolent, but disappointed, as though it had hoped to be forgotten, and Weiss finally understood the purpose of the rain, not a bombardment, not destruction, but erosion, a slow, deliberate unwriting of the world above to unbury this thing. This sun beneath the crust, this memory with gravity. Something had entombed it long ago, and something else had woken it. She tried to back away. Her feet did not move. The walls began to whisper, not in sound, but in history. Names she had never learned began to fill her mind. Magi of the Dark Age, legions with no remaining sigils. One phrase repeated again and again. When memory becomes mass, you must choose what to forget. And then, across every surface of the chamber, etched in lines of molten light, the same sigil appeared again. The eye, open, watching, and below it, a message: you brought me back by remembering. You must end me by forgetting. But she didn't know how. And the false sun pulsed again, heavier, hungrier. The false sun did not burn. It remembered. Each pulse from its core dragged Iskatar Vice further from herself, each thrum peeling back a layer of thought, memory, chronology until time ceased to be a river and became a circle. She saw her own life as though leafing through an opened data slate. Her childhood in the orbital habs of Cenarian 5, the rite of initiation, the solder smoke stinging her eyes. Her first interface with a living machine spirit, and then jarringly, horribly moments that had not yet happened, moments that would never happen. Her bones began to feel heavier. The inscriptions on her arms glowed brighter, syncing with the rhythm of the pulsing core. She tried to pull away, to retreat up the impossible staircase behind her. It was gone, not collapsed, not obscured, erased. The sun wanted her to stay, or rather, it needed her. It wasn't an entity in the way demons were. It didn't hunger. It didn't rage. It didn't hate. It simply existed, impossibly, unnaturally, with the inertia of thought made physical. And Vice was now part of its orbit. She fell to her knees on the strange metal floorith, it could be called metal land, placed her hands upon the surface. It was warm, familiar. It pulsed with memory, and in that contact, she saw again the truth. The iron rain was never an attack. It was a trigger. Each shard that fell had been a key, not a weapon. Each impact a data spike into reality itself, not to destroy but to remind. The world above had been a seal, its people, its machines, its prayers layers upon layers of deliberate noise to drown out the impossible song buried deep beneath. But now, it was awake, and worse, it was curious. Her mind flooded with imagery not her own. Civilizations she had never seen. Worlds built and unbuilt. Stars hung not in vacuum but in memory, blinking out not from age but because someone chose to stop recalling them. She saw figures stall, robed, faceless, not human. Not Xenos, but architects of archive, not empire. They had buried this sun, not because it was evil, but because it remembered too well. It had catalogued a reality that was no longer permitted to exist. A version of the galaxy that predated even the old ones. A form of history so dense that merely knowing it could collapse the present, and Vice had unlocked it. The chamber began to vibrate, not physically but in truth, the kind of vibration that threatened the soul. The floor beneath her brightened, symbols spiraling outward like ancient circuitry rediscovering itself. The eye flared open again across the vault walls, and a final message coalesced, so deeply embedded in her mind she would carry it even in death. You have remembered too much. The stars will soon forget you in return. And she knew, then, that she would not leave this place, not because she would die, but because her existence would be unwritten thread by thread, layer by layer until nothing remained but a phantom ripple in a forgotten system. A faint echo in the astronomic and dot. But before that final unspooling could begin, a voice cut through the vault. A voice she had never heard but recognized instantly. It was his dot, not in volume, in weight, not in command, in presence. And it said only this: "You are not meant to see this." The sun pulsed once more, and everything went white. There are moments across the vast span of the Imperium that pass unnoticed, silent tragedies on void-lost colonies. Entire civilizations snuffed out by warp storms, prayers lost before reaching any god. But some moments ripple. They move with weight through the unseen arteries of the galaxy, touching places even light cannot reach. One such moment occurred precisely 11 seconds after the full sun pulsed white, and on Holy Terror, the Astronomicon dimmed, not extinguished, not flickered, but dimmed in the vaulted, incense-choked cathedra of the Adeptus Astronomica, where thousands of psychers burn their souls daily to fuel the Emperor's divine beacon. Silence took hold. The black robes fell still, the robed choir frozen mid-hymn. One by one, they turned their gaze toward the center of the Astronomicon's chamber, where the light burned brightest stand for the briefest moment. That light bent, a curve, a flicker, dot an eyelid, perhaps, or a blink. The tech priests monitoring the Astronomicon's pattern did not speak. They had no words for what they saw. Their data slates showed no interruption in psychic relay, no error in soul expenditure, and yet all of them felt it the way a heartbeat feels the pause before a seizure. Something behind the veil of eternity had stirred, and the custodians moved. For centuries, the custodian guard had stood watch in the inner sanctums of the Imperial palace, unmoved by storm or heresy. But on that day, 39 custodies took a step toward the throne, not by order, not by instinct, by synchrony, as if a buried memory in their djinn-coded souls had activated in unison. In the depths of the Eternity Gate, Arch-Custodian Diocles Varanus paused mid-meditation. He rose, armor humming softly with reactive power fields, and turned his gaze not outward, toward the threats of the material realm, but inward toward the throne itself. He spoke no words. He needed none. The Emperor's frame had not moved. The golden throne remained what it had always been, a tomb of light, a machine of endless hunger, a beacon made from agony. And yet, there had been a sound, not heard, not recorded, felt like a whisper from beneath 10,000 layers of steel and prayer. A note struck deep beneath the octave of perception, enough to rattle every living soul within the palace. A sound without echo, because nothing dared reflect it at the same moment. Halfway across the segmentum solar, Inquisitor Nahum Roll sat bolt upright aboard the black ship's sacrament of iron. His fingers trembled on the edge of a data slate mid-judgment. The psyker opposite him, chained and shrouded, began to scream not from pain, but from recognition. She woke it, the psyker wailed, voice layered in 3 tongues at once. She woke it, and it looked back. Inquisitor Roll said nothing. He rose, moving past the containment cells, past the tormented cargo of sanctioned minds, toward the astropathic sanctum. There, in the flickering green of soul code streams, the same word repeated again and again across transmissions intercepted from half the segmentum. Event echo, no location, no source signature, but one ghost trace buried deep in the signal layers. Matched an abandoned taglong thought lost.tham nor is dash delta, and with it, one attached voice file, fragmented and degraded, spoken in a cadence of half-human, half-benoric breath, Iskatar Vice. Only one phrase remained intact. He blinked. The phrase echoed long after the vox loop ended. He blinked. Inquisitor Nahum Ral stared at the fragment displayed on the holoslate, his gauntleted fingers frozen mid-motion above the runes. He had served under the banner of the Ordo Malleus. For 77 years, had seen daemon hosts weep blood through their own skin, had watched reality unravel at the edge of blackstone vaults. But this was different. This was internal. The throne didn't blink. The God Emperor did not move. And yet, Roll's black ship adjusted course without needing the official sanction of Terra. Something in the warp itself bent subtly, like cloth being pulled toward a weight. The navigator, pale and trembling behind her viewing veil, spoke only once during the shift. It's remembering him. No one asked who, they knew. And that made it worse. Elsewhere, aboard the Veritas Crucis, a Vigilance-class monitor vessel, stationed at Segmentum Control, the warp charts began to unravel. Not in the usual way. There were no tears in reality, no demonic bleed, no spontaneous possession. This was subtler, crueler. One by one, the star charts began to shift, not through the hand of the cartographer, but through the data itself. Systems flickered out of known positions. Whole subsectors collapsed inward on the map. Not gone-UNREMEMBERED. That the chief cartographer, a woman who had held her position for over 2 centuries, screamed when the system labeled THM Delta blinked out of existence. Not with destruction, with apathy. The cogitator array declared it a navigational hazard and auto-flagged it for deletion, as if it had never mattered, as if it had never been, across the inner vaults of the Scholastica Psychana. Multiple choirmasters fell unconscious during midlink. Each murmured the same word before collapsing: vice. Not a common name, not even one in the central archive of known psychers, but the sound of it carried weight, the kind of weight that anchors thoughts to reality, or pulls them out of it. On Luna, a fragment of code buried deep within the Martian relays began to activate. Buried since the Great Crusade, meant to never run. A protocol, so ancient it lacked a name. It began to hum, it began to remember, and far below the Imperial Palace, in a place not mapped, not guarded, but felt beneath the substrata of gold and stone, where forgotten servitors chattered prayers without lungs and entity stirred, not fully, not in protest, but in pain. The golden throne hissed once, a breath, a bleed. No record was made. The custodians in attendance did not move, but one among them, ancient even by their standards, pressed his gauntlet to his helm and whispered, "He knows now." The sun beneath the crust was never asleep. It was dreaming of him. In the chamber where the golden throne burned through eternity, nothing had truly changed. The machine still hissed with the breath of 10,000 souls a day. The pylons still poured raw psychic light into the Imperium, guiding ships and minds alike through the warp. The Emperor still sat, still lived, still died, every second, forever, and yet, in the silence that followed the blink, that unrecorded pause, that impossible stutter, something new had entered the folds of the palace. Not a sound, not a voice, not even a thought, a possibility. The custodians stood still, but their minds reeled. They had been created not merely to protect the Emperor, but to perceive his will. And that will had always been consistent, unyielding, incomprehensible, but constant. Now, that constancy had cracked. Arch-Custodian Varanis stood closest to the throne, and he felt it first. A vibration in his armor that wasn't mechanical. A weight on his spirit that pressed like gravity from within. He reached into the datavo stored in his helm, calling upon ancient fragments locked since the Unification Wars. A protocol not uttered since the Siege of Terra, or a Barras Null. A failsafe, not against attack, against awakening. Elsewhere. On the bridge of the Sacrament of Iron, Inquisitor Roll stared into the burning eyes of the last surviving Psyker aboard. Her frame had withered, her skin burned translucent by the effort of containing what she had seen. She muttered ceaselessly, her voice a rasping echo layered with reversed syllables. She showed him. She whispered, over and over. She showed him what they forgot. Roll clenched his jaw. The name Iskatar Weiss was now a ghost in the inquisitorial archives. There were no records of her service, no orders, no chain of command, and yet the fragments remained file shadows, corrupted logs, timelines where she had clearly been. Her memory was being erased in real time, hunted by the very Imperium she had once served, and still the echo persisted. He blinked. What did that mean? A reflex, a rejection, a shock. The Emperor, master of mankind, Lord of 1,000 souls, father of Primarchs, did not blink unless something had been revealed to him, something hidden even from his vast mind. And if so, then what in all creation could have surprised the Emperor? Rahl stood at the edge of his thoughts and did not dare answer. Instead, he turned to his Vox throne and issued a single command seal: Tamnoris Delta. Quarantine it in the reclassify the system as null space. The servitor clicked. There is no Thamnoris Delta listed in current records. Then make it so, Rahl hissed, his voice ragged. Make it so it never existed. In the warp, something rippled. Not a storm, not a demon, but the shadow of a memory trying to escape. The vault they had just rebuilt. And somewhere, beyond the reach of light or time, the false sun pulsed once more, softly, like a breath caught between waking and remembering. There are stars that no longer shine, not because they died, but because they were forgotten. It began with the maps, within the core of the Segmentum Solar's charting vaults, under the authority of the novice Nobilite. Star scribes observed the systematic corruption of navigational archives. What began as a single missing coordinate soon spread a cascading series of inconsistencies. Vanishing data points, entire shipping routes leading into black space where once there had been whole systems. Attempts to restore backup copies failed. The backups themselves had been rewritten, and not by human hand. The process was quiet, clean, as if the galaxy itself had begun to revise its memory. Thamnor is Delta was the first to go. Officially, it had never existed. Its name purged from every administratum docket, its planetary code invalidated across all astropathic networks. The world, once teeming with fire and steel, with augmetic prayers and endless labor, had become a ghost, even in the minds of those who had visited it. There was a hollowness and absence where something should have been. Inquisitor Rahl could no longer remember the precise color of the vault walls, could no longer recall the smell of burning promethium that had clung to his armor after the retrieval order. He knew he had seen something. He knew a woman named Iskatar Weiss had spoken her last words through a corrupted data screen, but her voice was distant now, washed out, faint as if she were being erased from within. And yet, fragments remained in the rusted hollows of abandoned Mechanicum outposts across the edge of the Segmentum Obscurus. Broken servitors began to twitch, not from reactivation, from remembrance. Within them, buried deep in their decaying cortex, wafers lines of code surfaced, etched like scars into the fabric of their memories. Weiss's name, the eye, the spiral, and a single phrase, repeated in fractured syntax. He blinked. He blinked. He blinked. Far beyond, aboard the rogue data frigate, Omicron Veil. Tech heretics from the dark Mechanicum attempted to decode a signal intercepted by accident, while probing a dead zone near where Thamnoris Delta once resided. They called it the memory pulse. When they isolated the signal's core pattern, their ship's engine detonated in silence, no flame, no sound, just vanishing. All that remained was a single floating servo skull, its lenses spinning endlessly, repeating the words, "Remember me." and it will begin again. And yet, at the very edge of the segmentum, a miracle occurred. A low-tier adept of the Lex Mechanic order discovered an anomaly in a forgotten archive cluster beneath the ruins of Gaia Prime. The data was corrupted beyond repair, unreadable by any standard decoding method. But when he ran a sequence filter shaped by harmonic logic, a voice emerged, breathless, hollow. Vice, you cannot erase what was never fully written. The vault remembers. The vault remembers. The adept uploaded the fragment to his private cogitator. Hours later, his HAB unit ceased to exist. Not destroyed, erased. In its place, nothing. Not ash, not ruin. Just air. The street around it remained. But every citizen denied a building had ever stood there, and yet, in a child's pictograph discovered days later, drawn in smudged charcoal on synth paper, the shape was clear as spire. A vault, a sun, buried in the earth, and next to it, a name, Vice. The human soul is not designed to hold absence. It rebels against forgetting. And yet, across the Imperium, people began to lose shadows of memory, not events, not names, but feelings untraceable, sickening hollows where certainty once lived. Priests found gaps in their litanies. Vox scribes wrote half prayers and forgot why. Across dozens of forge worlds, tech priests began discovering white archives. Memory vaults wiped so precisely that the very cogitators refused to recognize the concept of data, and wherever the void was deepest, his name surfaced, Viss, not always spelled the same, not always spoken aloud, but it returned in dream litanies, in malfunctions, in glitched pict feeds. Some saw it etched behind their eyelids during reintegration. Others heard it in the hissing of power lines, just under the threshold of audibility, and with it, the echo of the phrase, now banned in 5 segmentum jurisdictions. He blinked. In the vault world of Cantaris Ix, a sealed chapel Mechanicum, long forgotten by the Martian priesthood, began to glow. Not from power, from remembrance, a light that pulsed like a wounded star, illuminating frescoes of machine gods, with weeping lenses and open palms. The Magos sent to investigate never returned. His last Vox thought, captured mid-transmission, simply whispered, the memory became real again. Not long after, every pilgrim en route to the shrine world of Varndelta began experiencing the same nightmare. A woman, a spiral, a sun that was not a sun, and beneath it, a voice saying, if you forget me, I die. But if you remember me, he does. The ecclesiarchy began burning entire repositories, not in secret, but in ritual. They called it the rite of beneficent purge. Any document bearing anomalous syntax, any artifact with unapproved inscriptions, was destroyed before it could infect memory. For the first time in millennia, they praised ignorance, but not all complied. In a deep warp listening post, beyond the edge of the segmentum pacificus, a lone astropath, blindfolded and dying, recorded a final impression. Her voice was fragmented, layered over itself like broken glass. But one sentence made it through. The vault was not to contain evil. It was to protect the truth from time. She died with a smile on her lips, and across the broken nodes of a dead forge world. On monitors long cold, a single frame flickered back to life, an image that should not have survived. Vice, standing before the false sun, arms lifted, face unseen, and beneath her, written in sigils, now banned in every forge registry, He remembers what he should not. And now the stars will forget what they must. Nothing ends in fire anymore. Once, destruction came with grandeur, with cyclonic torpedoes, exterminators' protocols, with the wrath of gods rendered in thermonuclear light. But this was quieter, colder, a death of context, not flesh. It began with the stars forgetting how to shine. Stellar charts began to disagree with themselves. Light from systems long catalogued now arrived, twisted, diffused, hollow as if reality no longer knew where those systems belonged. In the hall of astral memory on Luna, where the light of each known star is focused through ancient refractors to maintain cosmic orientation, entire constellations went dim, not out, just irrelevant, and within the black, a new pattern formed, barely perceptible, like the afterimage of a scream never heard. A spiral, repeating across gravity wells and warp tides alike. Always incomplete, always hungry. The false sun beneath Thamnerus Delta no longer pulsed, not because it had been destroyed, because it had succeeded. At the edge of Imperial comprehension, Iskatar Weiss no longer existed in any official archive. Her name had been purged from the Forge World's census logs, from the Martian data vaults, from the Newspheric registries of memory-kept adepts. She was neither traitor nor martyr. She was not, and yet the whisper lingered in the minds of psychers near death, in the static hum between vox frequencies, in the hollow of silence between moments of prayer. He blinked. Somewhere, someone always remembered it. A child dreaming of a spiral sun, a dying scribe writing Weiss's name into the margins of a holy text, a skittery unit pausing in perfect formation, turning their visors toward blank stretch of sky as if something enormous had just passed overhead. The throne did not speak, but the Emperor's watchers had changed. The custodians no longer stood in passive silence. They listened, as if waiting for another sound, another moment. And in the echo of the throne's mechanisms, one heartbeat slower than before, something watched back. A final fragment was found drifting beyond the warp, etched into the bone of a navigator who had no name. His craft atomized without force, his soul burnt clean. It read, if he blinked, what did he see? And beneath it, in glyphs older than the Imperium, older than Mars, older even than memory. What happens when the one who remembers everything chooses to forget? The screen fades to black, and in that last flicker before silence, the eye opens one final time, watching, remembering, or perhaps